So, Helen, thank you so much for being a guest on my podcast, Therapy for Guys. It means a lot that you made the time to connect, and I'm just really looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Not sure, looking forward to it as well.
Awesome. Well, just for the sake of the listeners, I'll just trace a little bit of how we got connected. I have a friend who first turned me on to Peter Rollins because I was interviewing, I guess, somebody he knows, Dr. Richard Boothby. And then I found out about Jay Baker, who I guess they're friends. And then when I was doing research on Tammy Faye Bakker and watching all the documentaries and getting to know Jay, I came across your work when I kind of had posted this thing on Instagram that I thought maybe Tammy Faye could be this saint of a radical or
Mm.
emancipatory, contradictory type of spirituality or Christianity. And it turned out you had already said something like that. So I was like, damn it, I wasn't the first one. No. But in connecting with your work and reading more about you, I was fascinated. And yeah, so I think there's a lot of intersections with what we do, and I'm just wanting to connect with you and learn more about your project.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I call myself a disciple of Tammy Faye. I mean, there's many people who are, I guess,
Nice.
all kinds of different people. But I'm lucky enough to be working on quite a big project about her at the moment, which reflects on, apart from being kind of just a biography of her life, it reflects on this idea that maybe there's been a bit of a second coming of Tammy Faye within the culture. There's
Mm,
been a musical by Elton John, a movie that won 2 Oscars about Tammy. And yeah, I mean, Jay and I had been wanting to work on something for a long time. And we'd been wondering what it says about contemporary culture that there's kind of this yearning for a figure like Tammy. So that's sort of what we're trying to answer as well in the film we're making.
okay. Wow. Okay. So I definitely want to go there in just one second if we can. But before we kind of circle around Tammy Faye and everything you think about
Mm-hmm.
her, would you mind just giving a brief sort of sketch of kind of who you are and what you're up to, like what your project's about, and
Mm-hmm.
then we can kind of jump into the questions?
Great. So I'm a filmmaker, but I also have sort of been dragged into kind of maybe the like thoughts and ideas space as well,
I love
which I
that.
didn't really like think I would be. But I guess I have friends who are, um, I don't know, philosophers and that kind of thing, and I like to philosophize a bit. Probably like the sound of my voice a bit too much. Except I'm always sort of like battling, like I just want to be making films, and then like I like going on and like having these deep dive conversations on podcasts and things. And I actually
Nice.
was making some films with a good friend of mine a few years ago, Adrian Romero. He's a musician, and we had lots of ideas and thoughts and all this kind of stuff. And we had this sort of idea that like um, not much of what is in the public domain is actually sort of like a truly public conversation, because we
Mm,
have this kind of weird infiltration of the idea of the public. Like what we think of as public is like anything that happens, in the presence of people that aren't from our own like family or friendship unit or whatever.
right.
But actually, that's not really necessarily the case, because there are all sort of like corporate interests that get involved, with social media and stuff. And there's ways that we have to, protect our brand, and we're never really outside of the economic system that
Mm,
kind of surrounds us. So it's really hard often to have like really honest and open conversations, and therefore even get to the point of understanding what you actually think. So we had this idea with this podcast we set up. When was it, like 4 years ago, that our conversations would be like an attempt at a public conversation about, we were both interested in psychoanalysis, and
okay.
I've been working with Peter for a long time, Peter Rollins, and he was interested in Pete's work, so this idea of like radical theology. And we wanted to have these conversations where we could find out, because I mean, I guess you do this with therapy, it's like it's quite hard for people to know themselves
Oh
when they're
yeah,
not in the presence of another person, to sort of like bounce off the other person their ideas and thoughts and have them mirrored back to themselves. And we kind
absolutely.
of, yeah, so this idea of having like a public conversation, I mean, selfishly you do find out about yourself and what you think, but
Mm.
then that kind of like started sort of more podcasts and meeting more people and writing, all that kind of stuff, which I didn't really think I'd be involved in, but I am a little bit, I
There
guess.
you go.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. And then you have this wonderful Substack. I read several of the pieces.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
is it the Dialectical Materialist Girl? Am I getting
That's
that
it.
right?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
okay.
right.
Yeah,
It's
very
actually
good stuff.
I have a podcast now, another podcast called The Lack, and
Yeah,
it's
listen to
with
a few episodes. Wonderful.
right
I
with
love that y'all talked about Severance, which is one of my favorite shows.
I
Yeah.
guess it's interesting. I know we it's with a political theorist and a philosopher, so we all have like slightly different positions.
Yes.
And we take like a film or a work of art each episode and like analyze it from our different perspectives and have a kind of a discussion. So those on my Substack, I actually this is when I like started the podcast and was really keen, and I like wrote something every time. But then you kind of quickly come to the conclusion that like no one has time to write an essay for every single podcast you do. So I had like maybe I don't know how many there are, like 15 or something up there. Maybe when the first episodes, if you go back to the lack, now I just like write some thoughts on my notes app and
Okay.
talk about that. But I did used to write something. So then I was like, well, I better put them somewhere. So I put them on a Substack.
That makes sense. No, but I like that.
Yeah.
So, do you think it's a good time to, because, okay, so I had at least like these three strands in your work that I think are all
Yeah.
connected that I really wanted to explore. And the first one being, Tammy Faye and what you were just talking about, that maybe there's a second coming, right? That there's
Mm-hmm.
this cultural moment maybe where people are reflecting on her and talking about her and just thinking about her work. I wonder if you could explore why you think that is. What is it about the conditions we're in that makes her this, attractive figure at the moment for
Yeah,
so
I guess
many?
it kind of like, yeah, I guess it ties back a bit to what we were saying about having conversations.
Okay.
Um, and obviously, there's like this like plethora of podcasts and chat shows and stuff. But it's like, do we really in today's society get to the heart of, or get to be able to talk to people from who have different perspectives, or are we really siloed? Are we just fed back by via the algorithm what we already think, and do we have just conversations with people who we already agree with? Um, sort of like there's almost this sort of received automatic idea of what a media product is going to say because of who
Mm,
made it and where it comes from. So there's very much like the internet, um, whilst it had this or has this potentially like radical openness, radical potentiality, we have sort of through the internet found ourselves more and more and more siloed off. And this is also maybe because of the the economic system when it gets kind of out of hand. It has to sort of like create well, this is sort of a complicated thing to get into, but one of the symptoms is maybe that there are big economic problems that need to be dealt with on a collective level, but it's so difficult for us to stomach that we'd rather maybe create enemies who we can imagine
mm,
behind this pesky person who doesn't think like me. We could have a better society. So we sort of the cultural war starts to get heated up when things in society are really, really difficult to face. So we're in quite a like divisional time. And Tammy is one of these people who has this ability. Well, the range of people who are interested in Tammy says something about Tammy. She's somebody who's able to unify, conservative Christians, maybe people who are from like a Republican background. She had the respect in the end, I'm sure, of the Christian community, even though she was sort of cancelled in effect by many
right.
members of the Christian community.
Yeah.
But also, trans activists and the queer community also adore her. And she's somebody who's able to unify these groups that in society today we seem to feel that there's like an irreconcilable difference.
Mm,
But there's something in her humanity, in her openness, in the risk taking of her non-puritanical, very open, very, it's a real risk to be as open as she did, and she really suffered for it.
yeah.
But there's something about her that unifies us and that speaks to, she was very, very, I mean, the funny thing is you can like talk about Tammy forever. So it was like, we were talking about this yesterday. We were doing an interview actually about this idea that Tammy's almost like one of these great works of art
Mm,
that you're never going to get to the core of. You can just, you say one thing. So, she was absolutely caked in makeup and dressed like a drag queen or whatever, but she's the most authentic person in a way. Like the makeup allowed her to be more authentic. So she's very like got this defensive mask in a way, but the mask is more revealing. You know, she was accused of being like extremely decadent and frivolous, but she also was somebody who was obsessed with finding bargains. And we actually went to her archive in North Carolina, and lots of her jewelry was like a ring that was like a cutout circle of a piece of cardboard with rhinestones glued onto it. And she was accused of like taking millions from all these people. But you know, she actually put $8 million of her own record sales back into the PTL Heritage Ministry, even though her salary was like, her and her husband's salary over the years was half that amount. So I mean, it's like none of it adds up. But the point being is that like you can just talk about her endlessly, and there's something very like universal and truthful about this fact. It's that we're all like that. We're all mysteries. We all, you know, kind of go on forever and can't be defined, and or categorizable in some way. There's something about being a human subject that is beyond language, is beyond the ability to put into boxes and to neatly say, I'm of this group, I'm of this identity. And Tammy just sort of explodes those identity categories. So there's something that's appealing to everybody in her. And I think at this time where, you know, we might libidinally want to sort of like cancel everybody or say that this person's the enemy, if only they didn't have these political views, then we'd have a great society. I think we kind of know that that's not the right approach to deep down. And Tammy really speaks to this. And it's, you know, not to be like too corny about it. Obviously, this is, you know, what the Jesus figure was able to do with this sort of unifying Jew and Gentile. You know, she's able to unify. And it's interesting, like even with this documentary. So I'm working on this documentary with Jay, and we've interviewed all kinds of different people. We have from, you know, religious figures who today I think a lot of people would think are kind of like very right wing and out there, to drag queens and queer activists, and you know, people who are really important in like the AIDS justice movements and stuff like that. So all these people adore Tammy and you know, want to keep talking about her. So yeah.
Oh man, no, I could sit and just listen to you talk for hours. That's incredible. I cannot wait until it comes out. So it's just going to be exploring all those marvelous themes.
Yeah, so it's basically it's a 4-part series, and it's looking at, you know, her birth to her death and resurrection. But not only that, looking at what her life says about society, what it says about America, what it says about the contemporary world.
Sure. Okay, I don't remember exactly what you titled it, maybe a figure of American contradiction, but in your Substack, you have this marvelous piece on her. And I just wanted to kind of read a couple things you wrote and just kind of hear your reflection. I think one of the things we probably have in common, although I'm really a novice, I'm not an analyst. I'm actually a feminist kind of psychotherapist. I use this model called relational cultural theory in my psychotherapy, and I work almost exclusively with men, which is kind of an interesting contradiction. But so I'm definitely not a Lacanian, but I would say that Lacanian thought really influences my thinking, and I'm a huge fan of Hegel. So I guess I add that caveat to say I'm understanding those categories that I want to ask you about, but I need to kind of sit at your feet and really understand. Like, I need you to help me understand what they really mean, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So at one point you write that she's the signifier of the lack in the big other. I don't know if you remember writing that, but
I
I'm curious
remember
what
writing
you
this.
meant
This
by
is
that.
like, I don't know why I think I wrote it because it was about, I think it was when the Hollywood movie with Jessica Chastain was coming out.
Okay.
And it was like, what is it about? Oh yeah, I'd watched it. Yeah, I had watched the movie when it just came out. And it's interesting because like all these different cultural takes on her, you know, they have a different perspective. And what I really got from that movie that was so interesting was, so it focused a lot on the rise. So she had this ministry with her husband called PTL, and they also had like a religious theme park called Heritage USA. And this was just like an extraordinarily successful ministry, to the point where it kind of defied all logic within the kind of economic system that existed. And, you know, there were, I mean, sadly, Jim lost his ministry and went sent to prison for 45 years.
Yeah, that's fucking crazy.
It is crazy. And it says something about the society at the time, that this was allowed to happen, given that what he was accused of, he did not have control of the books. I mean, this was a religious ministry, so it didn't pay tax. But on the other hand, you know, there was a huge amount of good works being done, so much money being poured into this massive, you know, place. And in a way, he was accused of being a sort of crazy capitalist, but he wasn't selfish enough to be a capitalist. You know, this was he had this vision. He truly believed in God, and he was trying to recreate a sort of 1950s version of America, this sort of clean living world, which also ties into some things that he went through in his life as a child, and almost like this trauma that he went through, where he wanted to freeze time in that time where things happen. But anyway, that's another story. And you know, also I've said about their salaries, they're accused of having these massive salaries, but actually if you do the calculations in terms of what they put back into the ministry, you know, they would have been much better off never taking a salary, and you know, having the books and CD sale, not CD, vinyl sales and things like that, because they were very, very successful with that. But in the movie, the way that Tammy is expressed is sort of portrayed during this time of the rise of this ministry is like she has this great sense of antagonism and disquiet in her. She's extremely anxious. So she knows, it's as if she knows deep down, not consciously, but you know, within her very bones, that something's not right. And actually, that the fall of the ministry in 1987, you know, it's this bubbling kind of issues happening, and there's something that's been covered up that's about to reemerge from 1980. It's about to be reemerged in 1987, and it all starts in 1987. Like things start to crumble when she gets a cold, but her health is already really, really bad. Jim is a workaholic. He's extremely dedicated to this vision of God. And she, you know, she likes the ministry and what have you, but she just sort of wants to raise her children and have a more quiet life.
Sure.
And she's sort of going along with this ministry. And they break ground on this new building at Heritage, and she's not wearing enough clothes. She gets ill. And then it turns out at the same time, she's taking so much Avitan. When she eventually gets ill, and this leads to sort of her collapsing, and they discover she's got enough in there. She's a tiny woman, like 80 pounds, like tiny, you know, it could kill her, as she says in The Eyes of Tammy Faye, the documentary by World of Wonder, it could kill a truck driver. So she's hallucinating. She's taking huge amounts of she chooses this thing called Aspergum, which I don't think exists anymore, which is like aspirin chewing gum, and she's just like really addicted, like painkillers and anti-anxiety medication. But there's something in her where she is like, her body represents the downside of what's going on. So in, you know, the idea of the big other in sort of Lacan or in psychoanalysis is this idea that there's some other out there who's whole, and this is the problem with our society today, and it's the problem with, it's not exclusive to sort of capitalism. This is like a universal kind of human tendency.
Sure.
Stringently and we can overcome this mess and difficulty, because like, how could the world be so shit, you know?
Right.
And so we imagine that there's somebody out there who is uncastrated, so who hasn't experienced the lack or the loss that we feel. So we might think that the crazy capitalist is just out there enjoying, when really the fact that they have to accumulate and accumulate and accumulate speaks to the fact that maybe they're suffering as well, and this system isn't really fixing them, and they're looking for something that's going to fill their sort of existential void. Or that there's some God out there that isn't divided, but that has all the answers. There's some commodity, there's some person, there's somebody we can be jealous of. So we feel that there is somebody out there that's whole and complete and perfect. But Tammy, and I feel like in that movie it was represented in the anxiety she felt in this very successful ministry before all the shit had gone down. She was already feeling the antagonism, and in her sort of like crazy makeup as well, which becomes more and more and more thick the more anxious she is, you know, that she's sort of there as kind of this fame and fortune and this success, quote unquote, and this like glorifying of God that her husband's doing. It's not making her happy. And she's very open about it, like it's right there on the surface. Even if she's not consciously open about it, it's just there. Right. And there's something about it in her that she's not like a lot of other celebrities who maybe, especially today, you know, there's this idea of like airing your dirty laundry and being honest, but is it
Sure.
really honest, or is this a sort of commoditized version of like showing your suffering, where you're saying like, I'm a victim and therefore, so it's sort of like,
Mm.
I've experienced this, so I have to be treated in a different way, and this makes me unique, or you have an identity signifier that makes you more valuable, or you can this sort of version of diversity politics, which basically concretizes the problem rather than is the solution that it purports, because we haven't quite got to the bottom of how this works. Whilst these things are good and can be well intentioned, they can sometimes be this sort of like flip where the lack or the problem becomes a commoditized solution. So it's like,
Yes.
I might have something that's happened to me that means that I have some truth about the world that I can tell you about. So it becomes a total rather than a loss. Maybe I'm not making that much sense. But Tammy doesn't do this. It's just there, she's just there. It's raw, and she one of the things about her that's so attractive is her openness to everybody. We
Yes.
a lot of us wish that we could be like that. I wish I could be more like Tammy, but it's not like, we might say something like the what do you call it, self-optimization, right? Or self-hacking, or like stoicism, where you're like, I'm becoming a better person, and this is going to
Right.
make me a faster runner and slimmer and all this kind of stuff. It's something that's like a great trait, her openness, that was absolutely not very good for her at all. She died very young, really, in her early 60s. She suffered with cancer for years. She really felt anxious because she was so open to people. And it's not like she's saying like, this is going to be easy.
Right.
It's like, and I think often what we have now is sort of like, you get on your Instagram, your infographic that's like, here's 10 ways how being more open to other people will give you a longer life, or something
Oh
like that.
yeah.
It's like, so this is, it's ways of turning these things that can be good into something that actually sustains the problem. And she's just like radically open, and she really suffered for it.
Wow. One of the things that you have written about, I think on social media and in that article on Tammy Faye, that just so resonated with me. But it's one of the most difficult things for me to do. It's one thing that I really struggle with. Is you said she's someone who took the contradictions of life but didn't create oppositions.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
wondered if you could reflect on that, because
Yeah.
I think right there, that's to me probably the thing I'm most drawn to her around, is her ability to just kind of hold the contradictions, or maybe embody them, but not create these oppositions. Because I struggle with that. I'm tempted to create the oppositions and scapegoat and enemies, even though I don't want to ideologically. I still do
Mm-hmm.
it. How do
Well,
how
this
do
is
you
the thing.
think
It's
about
it's
that?
really hard, and I think the thing is as
Yeah.
well that it's not like a moral question of like, oh, the person who's able to do this is a better person, because we
Mm,
think about the world around us and material conditions. Like, life is hard for so many people
it's
right now.
really
Like,
fucking
it's
hard.
so hard. And often it's very easy to think, when we're in this world of social media, to think I'm the only person that it's hard for. But it's hard for everybody, and the harder it is, the more likely it is for us to want to have easier answers. And you see
Mm,
this, like in the rise of fascism in the early to mid 20th century in Europe. This was a time, for example, in Germany, where they'd lost World War One. They were completely blamed for it in the Treaty of Versailles. They had to accept these terms. They were
right.
Huge reparations were put on them. They couldn't afford to pay. Their industrial lands were taken away. Their army was cut down when all the other societies around them, there was hyperinflation. This was a country that was extremely humiliated and extremely poor. And the ultimate oppositional ideology is fascism, right? Which is like, we can have like the difficulties of life aren't because of life as such and complex reasons and this history that our country's gone through, but rather it's because of one specific group. And if it wasn't for this group, we'd have a utopia.
Mm,
It's very tempting for us to fall into this logic. And obviously, that's a very, very concrete example at one period
sure.
of time. This isn't to excuse it, but you can see how the worse and the more difficult the material conditions are, the more likely we are to seek comfort in the idea that if it wasn't for this one thing, then the world would be perfect. And the trouble is, the society that we live in sort of sells us this idea that we don't come from antagonism, that, we aren't created by the Big Bang, that the world, like, you can't have light without dark, you can't have one without zero, you can't have yes without no, you can't have a word itself without the space that surrounds the word.
Right.
So, and at the end of the day, the tragedy is that we do all die. And obviously there's better ways
Wait,
to live
what?
whilst you live.
No, I'm just kidding.
I know. No, but it's true. It's very
Helen,
easy to forget.
how could you say that? No.
but and obviously this is just, we should make the most of our life while we live it. And I think there are ways that we can get to understanding the world to make the most of the world that we have while we live in it. But this avoidance, often creates a situation where it is worse, and it's worse for some people more than others. But there's this idea as well that there's this Irish saying, this famous Irish comedian has said it, it's called Dylan Moran, and he says, war isn't conflict, it's the inability to have conflict.
Yes.
So conflict being, tarrying with the difficulties of life, and we all have different desires, and we all have different paths, and we, have different experiences, but we have to somehow come to existing with other people in the world. And when we aren't able to do that, this is where we escalate to war. And in war, it gets to the point where we believe that if we can get rid of this other perspective, then things will be better. But there's always going to be other perspectives. There's always going to be different ways of seeing things, because we are all, because we speak, we all are lacking subjects. We're not if speech is the result of the fact that we can't really communicate very well. If we were able to just sort of like, so I mean, the example Peter uses all the time, so this is one of his, but he was a slow speaker as a child. So he was sort of 3 or 4, and his parents were getting really worried he hadn't really learned to speak properly. So they got the speech therapist in or whatever to the house, and she was sort of working out what was happening. And what was actually happening was that Pete, as a sort of child, had recruited his older sister to do things for him and to get things for him, so he could point to something and she would just go and get it, which meant he never had to learn to speak. So it's almost because he was too good at communicating, he never had to speak.
Got you.
So the point being is the fact that we all speak, it means that we're not very good at communicating. There was some point of frustration in the first place that meant that we had to learn to speak.
Oh, yeah.
So we're all coming from this lacking position, which means we all don't have this totalizing view of reality. We've all got a different way of seeing things. And unless we're able to tarry with that difference, we come to escalate things. But the oppositional thinking is sort of this utopian thinking where you can imagine that if only it wasn't for this group, this thought, this idea, then the world would be perfect. But often what happens is that enemy is sustaining a fantasy of perfection, that you would rather keep the fantasy and live in shit and keep the fantasy than realize the fantasy is not real and work to make the shit better. It's sometimes easier to have the enemy where you can think, at least, this world that I can imagine in the shadow cast behind them is better than the reality now. And you might not be able to get the fantasy, the fantasy. So the fantasy is never real. It requires that person to be in the way so that you never get it. Because if you got it, you'd realize, oh, it's just the same old shit.
Yeah.
But what you can
it's not
do,
satisfying.
It's not satisfying. But what you can do is realize that we're in this world. We have one go at it. It's not going to be perfect. There's not this sort of utopian world that exists precisely because of the logic. If you go into the logic, I mean, you'd have to sort of talk about it for hours to get to this point, but if you go through the logic of the way we speak, the way our subjectivity is structured, and the reality of the world, and this is a very Hegelian point, the world itself is divided, the world itself is broken, and it only exists because of this brokenness. And this is sort of what the Big Bang shows us in a way. But if we can get to a point of being okay with that and accepting it on its terms, maybe we can make something better. I don't know.
Yeah.
With what we've got.
100%, Helen. Are you a fan of Todd McGowan at all?
Yes, I am.
Okay. He's maybe the most influential thinker for me at the moment. I'm actually going to have him on the podcast later this week. But in our previous conversation, we were discussing his book on Hegel. And I guess the way we framed it was, and this is what I always tell my clients, because I kind of sometimes joke that even though they don't use this language, clients come to me and basically are asking me to resolve their contradictions or to erase their contradictions. And I just really resonate with McGowan and Hegel's idea that it's about reconciling ourselves to the contradiction. It's tearing with the contradiction,
Mm-hmm.
not trying to resolve it, because that's not possible.
Exactly.
In fact, I think what I see in therapy is people creating havoc in their life with all the strategies they use to try to or to try to deal with the contradiction or resolve the contradiction. It's when they can kind of, yeah, tarry with it or reconcile themselves to it, that they experience some type of, you know, I don't believe in real like full fulfillment, but some type of, you know, satisfaction.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so yeah, Todd uses the word satisfaction a lot, and Freud uses the word ordinary unhappiness.
Oh,
Julia
absolutely.
Kristeva, yeah, and Julia Kristeva uses this term like, oh, I actually can't remember it. It's something about, it's something like ordinary transcendence, but it's not that. It's like there is something transcendent, but it's not magic. You know, it's
Right.
life itself. But you know, in terms of what you're saying about like trying to resolve the contradiction and then just making your life worse, is like another example of this sort of object. You know, life's going to be perfect as long as you get it. Well, the thing is, it never is. And if you got it, you'd be bored and melancholic and you'd realize it's just the same shit. But
Right.
it's sometimes more soothing to imagine that there is this perfect world out there than to, well, to either get it, which is a disaster, or to realize that it doesn't exist in the world at all. And so you shoot yourself in the foot
Mm,
in order to sustain the not getting.
mm.
So you might, for instance, there's a girl, it was actually very sad, this Olympic, we don't have many of them, we don't have many from the UK, people who compete in the Winter Olympics, but
Okay.
it was a girl who did speed skating. I can't
Mm,
remember her name, but there was this sort of she was like, between the Olympics, she was like world champion, world record holder, and easy, got all the gold medals, got all the records. But then when it came to the Olympics, every single year, and this happened at multiple Olympics, every single race, she crashed out. She didn't make it. There was some kind of problem. And this is, you know, I don't want to psychoanalytically diagnose it, but this could be an example of somebody for whom an Olympic gold medal, even though technically, you know, she was the favorite, it could be a walk in the park for her.
sure.
And I'm not saying this is actually the case, but this is just an example of what could be happening.
Yeah.
Maybe she was imagining that the gold medal was the thing, the elusive thing that was missing, that if she got, her life would be perfect. And so she had to keep not getting it, because if she did get it, she would realize that whole fantasy. And often there is a phenomenon of people going to the Olympics and right after that, in this sort of 4-year cycle, falling into deep depression.
Mm,
Because once you've done it, once you've got the gold medal, you realize it's nothing. You know,
absolutely.
there's no magic thing to it. You know, it might be nice and it's a nice accomplishment, but the way that humans invest in things, you know, it's not like we think, oh, this is a cup of coffee, I'm going to drink a cup of coffee, isn't this nice, great, I'm satisfied. It's like, this one thing I'm missing, and if I got it, I'd get the recognition of everybody in the world, and I would be saved from the boring and difficult elements of life, and I'll be remembered forever, and my life will be different.
Right.
You know, we can do it with anything. We can do it with, but people do it a lot in relationships, obviously. I
Mm.
mean, you must know this as a
Oh,
therapist. They do it
sure. Looking for the
with
magical
cars,
other.
and exactly, that can complete them, cars or houses or qualification. But this is where, as you said, like we can still go after, you can't give up on what you desire and what you want, but you
Right.
can actually make it easier for yourself to get it if you realize it's not going to be the be all and end all magical solution.
Sure, sure.
So you can have it without the magic, but you can have it more easily if you don't imagine it to be magical.
Yeah, no, I almost hesitate to say this because I know it sounds kind of cliche, but it's the whole idea that you can finally discover happiness when you stop looking for it. Kind of, you
Yeah.
know, when you're just obsessed with trying to find it. And I don't even know if I really believe in it, but you know, the moment though that you're like, I don't know that it really exists, and I'm gonna kind of like calm down a little bit and not ravenously pursue it, then maybe it'll come in a type
Yeah,
of, you know, tolerable dissatisfaction.
exactly. I mean, I think, yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's right, but that's what I think as well.
Okay.
As in, like, this is what I talk about all the time. So I think there's something to it. But I guess the point that I mean is like, this also, I think if people think it's going to be a magical solution to do this, also it won't
Correct.
work, you know. So it's
Yes.
like, you know,
Yes.
people can be like, I'm so accepting of reality as it is. And it's like,
Yeah. Like I
that's not
have
gonna work
finally
either.
reconciled myself to the lack, and
Yeah,
you know, and everything's gonna be okay now. No, that's not how it works.
that's what, but also, but this is the thing I think I was talking about earlier, is that like any kind of the lack, quote unquote, can be commoditized as well. But what it
Sure.
ends up being is like a contingent loss. So often
Mm.
you'll see this on social media where people will air their dirty laundry, and it sounds like it's a public, you know, it seems on one level a public thing, but actually when you realize that it's a way that sometimes people are encouraged, you know, you see it in adverts all the time where there's a person that's presented that um from like maybe a former ideological version of a person or somebody you'd see in ads isn't that.
Mm.
But the isn't that basically becomes um ideologically somebody who possesses something more, like knowledge of what it's like, you know. So you might not be Claudia Schiffer, but you know something about authenticity that other people can learn from you.
That's so good.
So then it becomes the same thing. And there's a really big Instagram account actually about this girl who was plucked from obscurity from her sort of like honest rant about something, and she got millions of followers. And what it's now become is like uh, a promise that there's fulfillment in authenticity, but she's just selling authenticity, you know, by being like,
Right.
oh, I just don't brush my hair in the morning, and I, you know, who cares, as if that's where fulfillment is. But it's actually, there's no magic in that either, you
Mm.
know. And it could be like you know, who's to say it's not a performance of acceptance. So it becomes,
Right.
it's like it's an coming to an okayness, you know, in every dimension. And I feel like the market system we live in is very good at, and Todd talks about this in Captain as in Desire in terms of like the sexual revolution, whereas this idea of like, oh, as soon as we liberate ourselves sexually, then capitalism is over. But then what happens is capitalism capitalizes on the lack of repression,
Oh
and
yeah.
sex becomes the thing, that the commodity that sells. So, you know, we have this authenticity trap maybe where it's like, and then you're like,
Yes.
what does authenticity even mean? Am I exposing myself enough? I even feel this as this pressure in sort of creative field where you're like,
Okay.
you know, you feel this pressure to expose yourself, or I'm the kind of person who can say this because I'm this, or I went through this trauma or whatever. And it's all very well speaking honestly, but it too can become a trap, you know, in a way to mystify what's really going on in terms of how we exploit ourselves, how we generate value for other people, and this kind of stuff. So yeah, everything has to be done, I guess. And even I mean this has to, but you know, with this sort of humility. And I see this, you know, you see this in science, like the way science, there was a really
Mm.
good piece in Sublation magazine recently about the dialectical materialism of science. But you know,
Okay.
when you do a scientific experiment, there's a whole history of science behind you. But the only thing that really works, you can only come to meeting reality when it is where it is where you accept that you don't know. You know, you
Mm.
can't go into the scientific experiment with any suppositions, because that will influence the experiment itself.
Sure.
So you have to let it play out to you and then come to an understanding.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, science is the way that humans have, it's actually amazing how humans have been able to do this, given the nature of our subjectivity, given the difficulties of the world, that we've actually come to understand the world in some ways, and that we'll still come to understand it more with this ability to open ourselves up through the scientific experiment, like the double blind, as a way to, it's like
Right.
technology, to allow this kind of openness to reality to play out without this sort of, as soon as you desire to come to a conclusion, a foregone conclusions, that's not science anymore, you know.
Right.
So there are sort of ways that we can see this technology play. And it's funny because people say that like quantum science proves that Hegel was right before his time, but I actually think that just the basic double blind um, scientific experiment is an example of Hegelian logic in action.
Mm. Can you say a little bit more about that?
So
That
basically,
sounds
so
awesome.
yeah, I mean, like, so okay, well, how do I explain this? So okay, within Hegel, there's this idea of the owl of Minerva flies at dusk.
Yes.
Like the world has unfolded in a certain way and we can understand certain things about it, but we don't know for sure where it's going
Sure.
because there's always this contradiction, this potentiality in the world.
Mm.
We cannot, as soon as we think we know, that's some kind of like, that's some kind of magical thinking.
Do you think, can I pause you real quick?
Yeah.
Not that it has to be connected to any type of theology, but do you think that's what Paul was getting at when he talked about we see through a glass darkly?
Yeah, I
Could,
think so.
could that
Yeah,
be a
and
Hegelian moment? Okay.
I think
Okay.
that's absolutely right. And obviously we can, if we've used technology, science to build a model based on this insight of not knowing,
Right.
then we might be able to predict something very, very accurately. But also it's never total. We can never
Mm.
be guaranteed. So when we do a scientific experiment to add to the sum of scientific knowledge, we might have these things that we've double blinded up to that point, which we've proved beyond doubt that this
Sure.
is the way it works, quote unquote. Then we can do another experiment and build on the sum of scientific knowledge by not deciding the way that the owl of Minerva is going to fly. Right? And it's only then in waiting for the world to present itself in this way by creating kind of I haven't done science since I was like 15 years old, so what do I know? But like you do the experiments at high school where it's like, what conditions have you done to make sure you're not tampering with, how is
Right.
it? I don't even know what that was. So some science teacher will be able to tell us, maybe they're listening. But the way that it works, the way we get information is by not coming with these absolutes, by opening ourselves up to the contradiction of the world showing itself to us. So yeah, and I think that so people maybe this idea of we've got quantum physics and stuff, again, this is
Right.
totally out of my wheelhouse, and sorry, apologies to any scientists out there, but this idea that quantum reality is divided, is
Right.
contradictory, and this shows that Hegel's insight about the contradiction at the heart of reality. But the fact is that we've only been able to come to this point of understanding by realizing that the world is elusive, that it's not total, but we can't, just because we've judged that, at one point we thought that matter was one way, it doesn't mean, in order to get to the knowledge that it isn't, we've had to understand that that's just how we've come to understand it at that point. But to get to the next point, we've had to open ourselves up to reality again. So humans have been capable of this kind of logic for a long time. There's this sort of idea that the modern subject is more sophisticated and knows more than, and it's true in some ways, because the way that technology has developed and we have more access to greater things at our fingertips. But humans have been able to do this for a long time, and that's how we've got to the point of where we are today, which is really quite impressive. But anyway, I don't know anything about science, so
I know even less, but I'm really resonating with what you're saying. Now, so okay, Helen, do you think it'd be a good time to transition into this short film that you created?
Yeah.
And I'm assuming this is a part of the point. I don't know if it's all one or alone. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It's Allone, which I thought was actually kind of brilliant. It's this it's set in pre-Christian Ireland, and it kind of is a interpretation of a Buddhist parable. I was wondering if you could just maybe like set it up and maybe the background of why you kind of worked on that and what you think the big idea in the movie is. Because I just thought it was fucking brilliant and just beautiful and powerful. I loved it. I'm gonna share it with my clients because I think they need to kind of wrestle with it.
Yeah. So I guess I would say it's alone, but it is supposed to be a word that kind of encapsulates alone or one, all alone all at the same time.
Got you.
So I would just a background to where I heard about this. So I was actually with Pete in LA at Rob Bell's house, and they were recording a podcast. I think they did like a 4-part podcast on God or something. And they were just discussing things, and this parable came up, and I think Pete recounted this parable as it is, more or less in the sort of Buddhist parable. And I was like, oh my God, this is like the perfect film. And we have to make it in Irish because there's something about the Irish tradition and Irish language and Irish storytelling that kind of resonates with this. There's sort of something universal in it. In that, you know, if you watched an Irish, Freud has this is not like, this didn't actually happen, but there was this idea that he had said that the only, you know, nation of people that can't be psychoanalyzed are Irish people.
Really?
Because, yeah, the idea is that they've already come to the insight of like life is shit and there's nothing you can do about it anyway. So, anyway,
Got
so
you.
but the fact is that there is something. I mean, the Irish landscape is like beautiful, but also can be quite harsh and dark and has sort of like ethereal quality to it. In the history of Ireland, as well as really, there's been a lot of suffering here. You know, this is a crazy statistic. So I actually can't remember the exact statistics, but I was looking at it the other day. So the population of Ireland before the potato famine was nearly the same as that of England. And we're now nearly 150 years, actually probably more than 150 years. Actually, don't quote me either way. Over 150 years since the potato famine. And the population of Ireland, it's like 1.8 in Northern Ireland and like 5 or so in the Republic of Ireland. And England is like 60.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been, and so Ireland is a fascinating place on so many different levels, and people are drawn to it for so many different reasons. But there is something within the kind of like culture and the spirit and whatever that's quite that recognizes its own division. And even, I mean, I don't speak Irish, but we did the film in Irish, and a really good friend of mine, Maureen, was the lead actress, and she grew up with Irish, and she's a fantastic actress.
Oh, she was great.
And yeah, and there's something in, you know, I did a few evening classes just to familiarize myself a little bit, but there's something in the Irish language that has a very like collective sort of quality to it. So in English, when we talk about, well, it just, for instance, if you talk about something like a school or a hospital or a bus or something in Irish, the word refers to all the people in it.
Okay.
So a hospital will be like a place full of patients, or like a bus is a place full of passengers. So it really like reflects the sort of collectivity.
Got you.
And even the way that you know, I mean, again, I do have a languages background. That's why I'm like interested. I used to be a languages teacher, so it's why I'm interested.
Okay.
But I don't know much about. Here I am talking about something I don't know about again. So apologies. But like even the way that pronouns are used, like even this political party Sinn Féin, we ourselves, there's something like there's this kind of collective idea in it. So this film is about the collective experience of lack, this indelible collective experience of lack, and how recognizing that death is part of life and that everybody suffers. It's not that, you know, maybe today we have suffering that I imagine I can suffer, and then this sort of like weird therapy culture promises you that you can get over the suffering, or this person suffers and they've gone through some suffering, and they have an answer to me about how I can live a better life because they've got some lesson for me. The inside of this film is kind of the opposite. It's like we are all divided, we've all lost, but this is how we can recognize ourselves in the other and how we can experience community, and in the long term build something more constructive.
That was an interesting Freudian
that
slip.
Was Freudian slip. I know, what does that say? Shit. In the presence of other people. So in this film, it's a woman who has is slightly different to the Buddhist parable. I sort of changed it a little bit, but not that much. But
sure.
She has a child that's really, really ill, and she's alone. She's on her own with her and her child, and she goes out to try to find something that will cure it. And she goes to various witch doctors, and they give her potions, and she travels the land searching for some solution, and she doesn't find anything, and her baby's nearly dead, and she meets a woman on her way across sort of this Irish kind of landscape, and the woman says that there's a woman, a person, another sort of witch type figure who lives high up on a mountain, and only she'll be able to help her. And so the lady goes, the young woman goes, and on the way her child dies, and she's absolutely distraught. She arrives at this woman at the top of a mountain, and the woman says, "Oh no, I am able to help you if you can find a special kind of black seed, mustard seed, and make a tea out of it and fill it and feed it to your child, and the child, you'll get what you need, what you're seeking. And so but the catch is that the seeds have to come from a house that hasn't been touched by the black sun of loss, which she has experienced with her own baby. So she goes into the community, and she goes to all these different people, these different houses, and asks for the seeds. And they have the seeds, many of them have the seeds, but every single person has lost somebody or gone through something traumatic, like the black sun of suffering has touched their lives. And through this experience, she's able to come to understand that life is marked by death, that we all experience death, and that we all lose something, and we're all sort of marked by this lag. And in this sort of connection with the community, she's able to come to bury her child. So she wasn't able to face the tragic loss without this community of people around her.
Yeah.
And then she's able to sort of bury her child. So it's not the most uplifting thing, but the uplifting thing is that she's able to, but it's only through, what I kind of really liked about the parable when I heard it was, it's not just that, oh, you're just supposed to accept it. Because we're humans, we do think in these ways, we do invest in fantasy and promises, and we do hope for things, and we can't just be like, without sit, I'm accepting it. We have to maybe go on a journey, go after something, to then realize that it's not worth it. Like, you can't just take away from, it's easy to say to a young person, oh, don't bother trying to be a famous actor, it's never going to happen. Actually, the going after the desire to do it is something that's meaningful and important, and maybe they'll become the actor and they'll realize it's not that great, or they won't, and they've done something amazing.
Absolutely. So, I love that, Helen. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
So I was just going to say that it's like this idea of like only a Christian can be an atheist. Right. It's all very well saying, we live in a rational universe. I mean, do we? We do, but dialectically, whatever. It's not quite captured by sort of an oppositional binary yes, no logic. There is something elusive within the universe, but only an atheist can be, only a Christian can be, only by investing totally in what you believe can you come to realize that there's nothing there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have to
I
have
agree.
to go through this. Yeah.
So one of the things that's coming up is actually a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed both Peter Rollins and Richard Boothby, and we were talking about kind of a type of unknowing in Christianity. And I guess one of the things we concluded was, what we're not saying is, if there's this radical mystery, or there's this element of das Ding, right, in others and the universe, what we're not saying is, don't ask the questions, or don't continue to explore or to seek to understand at some level. It's just recognizing there's this thing we'll never fully understand, but that doesn't cancel the journey, like you're saying. And to make a kind of a shameless plug for therapy, I deal with people all day that, are trying to reconcile themselves to this awful reality in their life, whether it's the loss of a child or some type of trauma, and know they'll never fully integrate it or understand why it happened, but it doesn't mean they shouldn't seek to explore it and really go deep and again, not fully understand it, but have some level of familiarity with it, maybe.
Exactly. And we overinvest in things. That's what makes us human. Right. We take things to the extreme, but that's a positive thing. It only becomes toxic if we don't have this sort of element of questioning or exploring within that exploring. When it becomes this absolute, that it can become really toxic, and when we really believe that the thing we're pursuing would make us happy or would change the world, and then we start to seek these people that can block us from achieving it in our minds, or then we start to self-sabotage and create more problems in our life and really suffer. But that's not to say that we shouldn't do the things that we want, in all their risks, in all their kind of difficulties, but with that sort of position of, knowing that now is more important than, then or in the future, so really valuing the present as it is, that we can accept where we are and it's okay. And actually the self-help bit is like, then maybe the things that you want to do become easier, but it's
Right.
difficult to really accept where you are often.
Sure.
And what things that have happened, and this can be an impossible thing to do in terms of loss and death and stuff. Like,
Oh
there's things
yeah.
you just can never accept.
No, I know that's the case for me. And I guess one of the things that does frustrate me about the self-help, and I'm in those circles on social media, given what I do, that there's almost this finality where it's like, okay, if you do these 5 things, then you will reach a point where then you're like really good. And my philosophy is, I don't know that you ever stop struggling with certain things, or you never get rid of the contradiction. So we've got to stop telling people that there's a finality to things. It's
Exactly.
kind of open-ended, and
Yeah.
the struggle endures forever, as pessimistic as that sounds.
No, it does. It's never. And the thing is, it's like, if we talk about, issues related to society at the moment,
Yes.
things have to happen, right? Some things have to change in terms of our economy. Things aren't working.
Sure.
But often people might think that if you listen to this sort of form of things, it's sort of just give up on trying to change. It's not going to do anything. That's not the case at all. It's almost like, if you can disinvest libidinally from fantastical objects, you can sort of actually become less capitalistic in a way. And this isn't to say that capitalism is, there's all sorts of ways of organizing society that have downsides, and I think we're just witnessing the downside of our economic system at the moment. And things need to change to make the world more livable for many people. But it's actually, we're able to change it more, not in the sense of like, we've accepted our that one accepts that one's poor or something like that, but one accepts the logic of the market, which says you can have this, you can be the person who wins the lottery, you can be the person who's plucked from obscurity, and it's going to be you. But then you can look at reality and maybe think about changing it and taking the political change, that to make the world better. Things do need to change. And it's often, I think people can think that like this sort of point of view is saying, don't make any changes. Just it's absolutely not. You actually become more freed up to make positive change.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
This sort of perspective. Yeah.
Okay. Can you help me understand a quote from Lacan that you actually include that you include in the movie at the very beginning? Several people have asked me about this, and I don't know exactly what he meant, but I'm intrigued. Right? Love is giving what you don't have to someone who doesn't want it. Do you have a sense of what that means?
Yes. So first of all, the not having, right, is we all don't have. We all miss something. So when we talked about like how humans come to speak.
Yes.
It's because of a primary frustration, a primary kind of sense that we're missing something. And you've talked about like the death sting in the mother.
I was going to say, right, isn't it related to that?
Yeah. So there's part of us that we talk about Tammy Faye like this, and all these great works of art, that you can talk about them. And this is also why it's interesting, because like, the filmmaker David Lynch, he's always like,
sure,
I never talk about my movies, I never philosophize, the movies do the talking. And I'm like, the reason why I don't mind talking about my movies or talking is like, you're never going to get to the bottom of them anyway.
No,
I don't even know what they're about. So like, I'm not saying like David Lynch is wrong. Like that's a perspective, but like, I actually think that he hasn't gone a step far enough in what he's thinking, because it's like,
agreed.
His films do the talking, but actually, do they do the talking? Like, what makes the works of art amazing, elusive, and like compelling, is that there's something in it that we're never going to understand.
Yes.
So
yes,
and that's what makes art. That's why.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we have that. Okay, we will have that, and then often what makes us love and invest in things and other people is the fact that we have this sense that we don't have something, and that we can connect to somebody else because of that thing that we don't have. So we're giving that part of ourselves, but it's also what makes us lovable. So I mean, Lacan and Freud talk about this a lot. I mean, objet petit a, there's this elusive thing in the other person that keeps us coming back, wanting more. We're never, the person that we love, you know, we can talk about like when we're attracted to somebody, it's like they're extremely handsome or they make lots of money or something. But
Right.
really, you know, when you really love somebody, and Sheetex talked about this, it's like when they've got something in their teeth and it doesn't bother you, or you know that they do
Yeah.
something that annoys you, but you still, you know, because the love is about something that's beyond these sort of categories of like how hot are they or whatever.
Right. It's the imperfections.
Exactly. And then I guess the not wanting it is that this is something, you know, in order to love, maybe in order to invest in things, we have to imagine that they are a perfect solution to us, but they aren't. And the thing that
Mm.
we're giving them, that's the elusive part of us, is not going to fulfill them either. So it's like we both want it, we don't want it. Like the elusive thing, the objet petit, is the thing that makes us want and makes life worth living and makes us curious. And but then it's like, do we really, you know, what we think we want is something whole and complete and perfect and a perfect commodity that's easy and that just fulfills everything that we feel like we need. But in the film, I guess what I liked in this quote was this idea that, you know, when this woman comes to understand that lack is part of life and
Yes.
that death is part of life, it's a message she doesn't really want, but it's
Mm.
given to her in love, you know, and it's a message of love because it's the thing that's going to help her.
Okay.
And that she, you know, that death is part of her as well, you know, she's
Yes.
going to die as well. But essentially all there are these other people who come with this loss as well, who are offering up their own not having to her in love.
Got you.
Yeah.
Oh, that's powerful. So I guess one of the things that's coming up, just to go back to Das Ding, I don't know if you've
Yeah.
read Richard Boothby's latest work,
I
Embracing the
haven't
Void.
yet.
Oh God, you have to,
Yeah,
because
I will
you know
do.
his basic argument is that, you know, what humans have called religion in its various manifestations is kind of our attempt to relate to Das Ding, and he goes
Mm-hmm.
deep into
Mm-hmm.
that. And yeah, I just think there's some interesting connections with what you were saying. And you know, one of the things that's really fascinating too about his argument in terms of Christianity is that, you know, if there's one thing that critical scholars point out about Jesus that's really unique to him, is that he talked about loving one's enemies, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
connects to what we're talking about. But what Boothby points out, I don't know if it's unique to him, is that the problem with that, as great as that injunction is that it also creates a tremendous amount of anxiety, and it's probably what led to Christianity becoming this massively doctrinal
I
uh
know. I think
kind of
this is
tradition.
correct,
Yeah.
because I feel like Tammy embodies the message of Jesus, right?
Okay.
And but look how anxious she is.
Yes. No. Exactly. I was thinking about that when you were mentioning her anxiety.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
Maybe
And
for her it was the makeup instead of kind of a doctrine.
exactly, it was the makeup. It was, she had all these bodily symptoms. She had, you
The
know,
ticks and
she ended,
grimaces, I think, as you put it.
exactly, and she ended up, you know, with cancer and really being ill for a long time
Mm,
and being very unwell and being addicted to sort of medication and stuff. And I have to say this anecdotally in my own life, right? So
please.
I I'm a very anxious person,
Oh,
right?
I am
And
too.
so, and I don't think that this um and I do often wonder if it's to do with the fact that I'm into this sort of set of ideas in a way. But and this is where it becomes quite difficult, because I think that
Sure.
anxiety as well can be assuaged by better material conditions and relationships and parental relationships and familial
Yes.
relationships. And what I think the problem, what this exposes maybe, is that we're in a society where I think the set of ideas is really necessary to help us, but we haven't got to the point yet where we're building a society that makes people less anxious materially. So, you know, social media is something that makes people extremely anxious, you know, feeling like you're not doing enough and other people have more than you, and this
Yes.
perpetual need to succeed. But not only that, this student loans, rising prices, inflation. When am I going to get a job? How am I going to pay off my debt? You know, and we are more there was a study recently in the UK that I say this all the time, like, because I guess when you do podcasts so much, you like have these examples that you've thought of or you've seen, and then you can't remember the exact details. So I don't know the
Uh-huh.
exact digits, but something like, you know, a couple in the UK saves something like 800 and something pounds a month as a couple rather than as a single person. So
Got you.
obviously, in terms of profit seeking, it becomes more amenable to the market to be, not that there's a problem with being single, and many people, and you know, it's better for them and it's better to be single than a
Right.
toxic relationship and all this kind of stuff. But we have a society that divides us up, and we don't have this interpersonal connection. You know, when we are, a lot of our human relationships have been replaced by screen mediated relationships. And one of
Yes.
the issues with this, it's like, so Instagram is not like just a public platform, it's a privately owned platform that needs to seek profit. So it
Mm.
has to get us addicted to watching it. So it might make us, show us things that make us feel inadequate, so we keep coming more for the solution.
Yeah, those
So
motherfuckers. No, I'm just kidding.
this fucking exact, but also, you know, seeing someone through a screen, because of the history of like cinema, right, where, so, I mean, this isn't the only reason, but this is an example where
Sure.
we used to watch movies, and these were, and even today, you know, these are gods and goddesses on screen who we relate to, and we can project, you know, like the mirror stage in childhood development.
Yes.
These are whole and complete beings who have it all together, even if in the
Non-castrated.
story, exactly. And so when we see, because of that whole history of cinema, it's like, and also the nature of how we, so when we're children, we don't feel, we feel like this sort of like unorganized bunch of limbs and feelings, and then you
Yes.
start to see yourself in the mirror, and some adult will say that's you, and in the mirror the image is all tied together in a body, and it looks all together and with it, and this is part of how we come to identify as a human subject. But it requires this sort of investment, sort of incorrect, quote unquote, investment in this image, which is whole, even though we don't feel whole. So we do this with images and screen media. It's like they appear more organized to us than we
Right.
feel ourselves. So this sense of the other person, who we're not sort of sitting down in a pub as much as we used to, or whatever, or having debates, or
Mm.
you know, being in a village where there's 1,000 people and everybody knows everybody's business, and you know that everybody's got difficulties, whatever. We're just seeing this perfect version of all these people we know or acquainted with, and it makes us feel anxious because they seem more together than we feel.
Yes.
And I think that the anxiety of our age is what needs to, you know, the anxiety producing sort of like material conditions of our age need to change. But maybe the only way to do that, or one of the ways to do that, is to see reality for what it is, and these sort of like philosophical insights can help us do that. But there is a worry that they can make us also feel anxious. But
Yeah.
in the sort of material conditions of today, I mean, like, it's something that I do worry about. You know, is it right to give people these ideas? Is it better and easier to be less anxious in our delusions?
Mm.
I mean, I don't know.
I wrestle with that personally with my clients. No, I think it's a great question. I'm glad you're bringing that up. I definitely
But
don't have an
yeah,
answer, but I do think about that as well.
but I wonder, I don't know, this is a question for you. Do you think that, like, in accepting anxiety, that there's a way to lessen the toxic effects of anxiety? I mean,
100%.
yeah.
Yes, yes. I mean, eh, from a therapeutic perspective, you know, I work with a lot of teenagers, a lot of teenage guys, and they first of all don't want to be in therapy. They're almost kind of
Mhm.
forced to by their moms. But when they
Yeah.
get there and they're very anxious, you know, the first month or so is trying so hard to deny the fact that they have anxiety. And it's not until they come to some type of acceptance of that reality that they can make any real progress. So I'm a huge believer that, yeah, you can't move forward in any way until you kind of come to that kind of hard
Mm.
reality. Oh yeah, I'm an anxious person, or
Yeah.
I'm enmeshed in this kind of toxic system at school or whatever that's really resulting in this anxiety, and they have to kind of come to terms with that before they can make any progress. So yes, I think that's important.
But sometimes, yeah, it is true that sometimes, like, the anxious symptom is deflected into something else, and so
Oh
you don't
sure,
even know that you're anxious because you've got some
sure.
other symptom. And then when you actually feel the anxiety, actually this is the place where you can do something about it. And when it's sort of caught up in this other kind of symptom, or you don't even know that you're anxious. I mean, I did a couple of
Right.
years of psychoanalysis recently, and it's hilarious. And this is also where, you know, this vision of yourself is never, and this is why you need others and you need communities, because
Yes.
psychoanalysis and therapy works by showing you what is already going on with you that you haven't been able to see. And
Yeah. My wife can
yeah.
show me and reveal to me that I'm a piece of shit in ways that I probably can't see. But okay, but I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
interrupted you. You were
no,
going to
right.
say something about your analysis.
But yeah, I didn't realize that I was anxious. it was hilarious, but I am.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
So, okay,
Yeah.
Helen, do you have time for maybe one more strand in your thinking that I was accessing that I wanted
Yeah.
to ask you about?
Go
Okay.
for it. Go for
And
it.
I know in a little bit I have to get off because I have to run to my office and see my first client this morning. But um, you and I in my notes I don't remember. So you okay? Yeah, you wrote a piece in your Substack that I'll include in the show notes. The
Hmm.
man who shot liberty, valance, and masculinity. So
Hmm.
this is therapy for guys. I do work a lot on gender and masculinity, but I thought you had some really fascinating things to say about that. And so I guess my big question for you is, have you thought through why figures like Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson and
Hmm.
who is it, Matt Walsh, why they're so popular these days? What does it say
Yeah.
about the contradictions that we're living in?
It's interesting because I mean I haven't really thought about Jordan Peterson is an interesting one because like I can see why people are interested in him, but from a psychoanalytic perspective, the critique that
Sure.
I and I think it's funny because I think some people have thought like that they thought that I would like him, but he like really, in my opinion, gets psychoanalysis asked about tits. So that's what really he's got, like he's just I just don't think he's like theoretically a very, but I can see why people have sought these figures out, and I think there's lots of different reasons. Um, Obviously, our society and economy has changed a lot in a very, very quick period of time.
Yes.
This has meant that certain traits are less welcomed and less uh, useful, quote unquote, to the
Mm,
market. Um, and I also think there's that. There's also things like we lived for not just for sort of economic reasons, but more kind of societal and cultural reasons. Things have changed in terms of um, family structures, the way children are born, all these kinds of things, and it's happened so quickly, and things change. The ways that societies have been organized in different periods of times have been different, and a lot of changes happened a lot really quickly. Some of the changes though, so on the one hand we can say that this affects um, gender roles, or that gender roles become less appropriate,
sure.
but I actually think that the really bad stuff is not stuff that's affected one gender or another, but the stuff that affects everybody.
Mm,
So living standards have dropped immensely for everybody.
yes.
um, Opportunities are fewer for everybody. The last 3 years, and the wealth of the whatever top percent has has gone up hugely, and normal people have been squeezed. And
Yes.
the groups of people who've been squeezed first, I mean, there are all different ways, of cutting the cake. So we can talk about historical injustice to different groups of people, in terms of different centuries and the legacy that's had today. And those are all really important discussions. So this is one discussion amongst many, but a lot of the jobs that went first were sort of manufacturing jobs, traditionally masculine roles. We live in a more sort of service-based economy in the West. But these are problems that have happened because of the entire economic system.
Yes.
And what is easier on, say, let's say, both sides of the political spectrum, or all dimensions of the political spectrum, is tying back to what we're talking about, is to say that the problem is not an intrinsic problem with the entire system, a system that works because we deny it, because it's easier for us to deny it. We can imagine that we're anti-capitalist, but still, we're talking about these sort of things like the authenticity, how that can be captured
Yes.
by the market. Like,
Oh
we
yeah.
often just think that capitalism is just like having a job and not getting paid enough. It's the way that social media works. It's the way that we're libidinally invested in commodities. It's sort of our religious involvement in the market system, and it's very difficult.
It's
Not only
hiding
for
our
us.
source of satisfaction, I think, as McGowan
Exactly.
puts it. Yeah.
It absolutely is. So not only do we not understand how it operates, but we don't even see it,
Yeah.
and we're so caught up in it in this sort of utopian level, because it's almost like not really like an economic system. It's more like a libidinal system. So even if
Mm-hmm.
we can consciously be like, oh, I'm a good person, I vote for the right parties, I'm not a selfish person, I'm not okay. We can still be invested in our own pursuit of satisfaction in a way that's highly capitalistic. So the problem is something to do with this system and where it's got us right now and how it affects everybody. But the pull of it is so strong that we'd rather say, on the one side, my group of people has been affected more than everybody else. Well, there are, but the thing is, this is the thing that's really sad, because some of it's true as well. There are groups that have been affected more than everybody else. But let's say in this instance, that say men have had it hard. And, you know, there's elements of truth to that. But where it becomes incorrect is when it's saying the only problem with the world is my problem, not this universal problem that cuts across everything. And it would all be fixed if we went back to monogamy. I don't know, what's he called? Jordan Peterson say, you know, enforced monogamy or something.
Enforced monogamy, yeah.
Or if women did this, or if men got this, if men were respected. Unfortunately, the problem is much worse than that. You know, it's much more fundamental and universal. So there's on that side, but then on the other side, there is this sort of thing of like, if only we didn't have these toxic men, if only we, you know, men knew you see these slogans, these sort of, I said this actually, you see this often, you know, where you have these like sloganeering and these sort of movements that don't really go anywhere, but kind of maybe stoke a culture war,
right?
Which gets us stressed out at the level of
what is a woman?
Exactly. Instead of actually, why are we so stressed and anxious about something when we have this wider economic problem that nobody feels that they have the power to do anything about? It's almost like there is this, you know, we feel we don't have the power to do anything about it. And also we don't really know what it is because we haven't really, I think, theologized the problem.
Ooh, I like that way of putting it.
So you have this sort of, on the one side, this group is the problem. And if it wasn't for this group, then we'd have a better functioning society. It's just toxic, man. The patriarchy, that's the problem, patriarchy.
Right.
When I don't think people actually know what the word patriarchy really means, for instance. And on the other side, it's like, if only it weren't for feminists, then the world will be perfect. Or all we have to do is go back to the way things were, then it will be great. Well, back then it wasn't great either, and there are lots of people who are excluded from that.
Yeah.
But also there's no going back. You know, there's no going back. We you know,
no, you're
we're
right.
in a different world, you know, and but having said that, so there's that one thing where, and it's easier to have this culture war, you know, it's more libidinally satisfying because we get to sustain this utopian fantasy that the world's perfect and there's a perfect economic system. We don't have to tarry with our contradictory desires. There's this sort of toxic certainty that if only we fix this, and on one side it's this person's the problem, and on the other side it's, you know, we've suffered the most and you're the problem. And that's really, you can see that intense sort of capitalistic logic there, where it's like the same as the commodity.
Oh yeah.
As long as I get this pair of Nike trainers, then I'm going to be whole and complete. So as long as I get rid of this group or this idea, then it's going to be perfect. And I think both Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson and people like that and their detractors play into this dynamic, even though we can actually logically say that the detractors are correct. Or we can also logically say that, yeah, there are some things that Jordan Peterson says where I understand why people are drawn to that because of the way they're feeling.
Right, exactly.
But there's something even more frightening going on, but potentially more powerfully liberating if we're able to reach that point. And I think you see the troubles in Northern Ireland, it got to a point where people realized that we had to do the conflict in order to get rid of the war. And that's sitting down with people and making agreements with people and you know, having grace for people in order to move forward. And this is why I think Tammy is so, you know,
yes, to bring it back. I love it.
We all know, we see ourselves in Tammy, all of us. And she is somebody who's like, you know, damn it, we have to sit down and hash this out and then understand really what's going on. And this is also to say, just as a caveat, like, you know, there are people that suffer worse under capitalism. There are people that are more exploited. There are these, but often those people don't even get to look in the debates precisely because they're exploited. It's like you only know you're a victim when you're no longer a victim, in a way. It's like you've been victimized by the system. There's no way of it. This victimization is completely hidden, and there is a huge amount of exploitation and unfairness. But it's getting to the point where the unfairnesses are creeping further and further and further up the economic system that people, are kind of.
Yes, the disparity is growing.
The disparity is great. And I think, you look at, I mean, I'm a millennial. And
I am too.
Sort of, millennials rock, right? I feel like there's this thing, millennials are snowflakes, millennials are the most pampered generation, but it's like when you think of the recessions that people have gone through, the amount of debt people got into, the way their life, the promises they were sold, growing up in the 90s when there was greater affluence than now, and people are so well qualified. And I call it the holding pen that people get into in their career, where they're promised that they have to do one more master's degree and then they'll earn a salary. It just goes, and you can see that these people, and I think some people from some corners of society are like, well, these people went to university, what do they know? They're not like me. But actually, there's a lot more in common with people who didn't go to university and people who did go to university in terms of the dissatisfaction and economic issues with the system.
Yes.
So the point being, I think with that essay, it's like, I don't personally think that patriarchy in the received wisdom sense of the world is the problem. It's a way to, maybe it's a shorthand people use to try to get to the issues, but the issues are much more universal than a question of man and woman. Okay. And I think, it's an easy binary, in the past, and this is what, in the British colonial system, what happened is, in these sort of arbitrarily created countries that were part of, when Britain had this empire, they would divide people up along race lines and often choose a smaller group of people to be elevated in a certain way.
Sure.
And it's these visible differences that can be weaponized as a way to capture the imagination and to have this sort of identitarian issue, instead of realizing that there are people who are treated worse, but in order to get to the point where we treat a certain group of people less bad than others, we have to have this universal understanding. Yes. So we have to get to a fellow. So, and I think, I love men. I think men are fantastic. I think what men have to offer is, and I don't believe that it's ever the solution to blame one category of person, because there's nothing that anybody can do about it anyway. And I do see that the problems are not, and often, because I guess I'm a bit more materialist than the average person, I would see that a lot of the changes that happen in society aren't necessarily because of what we think we've changed, but rather because of material changes that have created subjects in a certain way. Or say, for instance, the introduction of the pill, for instance, this changes society. This isn't necessarily that we've just taken it upon ourselves. There are lots of brave people who do take things upon ourselves, but this is wider movements happen. So I think you have to have a lot of empathy for people.
Yes.
Because there's systems that are going on beyond people's control.
Yes. And this is where the eyes of Tammy Faye come in, right? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this is what Jay and I were connecting over, was her tendency to take those that had died in her life, their glasses, and it was giving her an opportunity to see through their eyes. I like the psychotherapist Irvin Yalom, and he talks about empathy as looking out the other person's window. I like the idea of empathy being looking out the other person's eyes as best as we can. We can't do that perfectly, but I think we need more empathy in our world.
I think we absolutely do. And I think it becomes more difficult the more alienated we are, the more siloed we are, the less sort of public interaction there is, the more economically precarious we are. But I think one of the lessons of psychoanalysis is there is no uncastrated person. Everybody lacks. There's no group that existentially has something that other people don't have. But materially, there are groups of people or individuals that have loads more than other people, and that's something that we can do something about in terms of political change.
Yes.
But existentially, it's like, because we live in a material, and this is why I like the sort of dialectical materialism. It's like it combines this idea of materialism with also the fact that humans are human subjects.
Right.
And so we experience reality in a certain way. Material reality affects our subjectivity, and our subjectivity affects material reality. And we can conflate the two a lot. So we can say, well, how can you say we're equal because that person's a billionaire and that person isn't? But it's like, well, if we base our political and material philosophical political understanding on the fact that existentially this person also suffers, and the £1 billion doesn't make a difference. Okay, it can make their life easier, can make them happier on a material level, but on this existential level it doesn't.
Yes.
Then we can maybe take this like fantasy dynamic, this toxic pursuit dynamic out of the market system and make it more reasonable and fairer. But I don't
Yes.
think we can just do that without some kind of philosophical shift.
Oh, I love it. Okay, Helen, I am like crossing my fingers, really hoping that this isn't the last time that we talk. Because
Yeah, it's been a great conversation.
yeah, I really enjoyed your energy and just your perspective. In fact, selfishly, I wanted to ask, have you by any chance watched the show? It's on Apple Plus, set in Ireland, called Bad Sisters.
No, I haven't, but I do want to. I've heard
Oh
about
my
it, but
God.
it's
Okay,
going to be,
maybe in the
yeah.
future we could talk about that because that's
Okay.
it was my wife and we it was one of our favorite shows in 2022. It's
Oh,
incredible. I think it has a lot of
great.
interesting ideas within it.
Great. And I'm looking forward to it. I actually realized I didn't realize I had a subscription to Apple TV, and I did. So I
Oh,
need
there
to
you
get
go.
through. I need to get through all these shows. Yeah.
Oh, that was such a good one. Okay, so before we sign off, because I do have to go to
Yeah.
see a client, is there anything that you would want to leave sort of the audience with in terms of who you are, your project, anything coming up? Where you would encourage them to go to find you if they want to access your work, that kind of stuff. And I'll include all the links
Yeah, I mean,
in the show
share links
notes.
to movie. The stuff that I like more about what I do is the movies than the ideas, but
Okay.
movies take a long time to do, and also it can be quite difficult to share them with people because of, I mean, this is for the market system, you have to kind of have things private and stuff, which I really don't like. And
Right.
I'm actually just thinking of putting everything online.
Okay.
But if you share the Allone link, that would be great.
Okay. Yes, I'll do
Yeah,
that for sure.
yeah.
Okay. So would you mind just ending with the line of the podcast, which I think you'll resonate with, kind of captures my spirit and what this is all about, but just saying the words, continue the conversation.
Continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Helen.